Alyssa McLemore.
Olivia Lonebear, say her name.
Olivia Lonebear.
Ashley Heavy Runner Loring, say her name.
Ashley Lori.
Everybody always gets that one. You know, us natives, we gotta get the mom side, the dad side, you know. Sometimes it's both names carry so much meaning. You know, we're like that. And also, we don't want to forget if there's other families up here. We have this sister right here, Sonia Medine May Seiwick. See, that's one of those. Can we say Sonia Seiwick? Sonia Seiwick, say her name.
Sonia Seiwick.
Say her name.
Sonia Seiwick.
Lady, you winning. Say her name.
Lady winning.
Khadijah Britton, say her name.
Khadijah Britton.
Esther Smith, say her name.
Esther Smith.
Rhonda Jones, say her name.
Rhonda Jones.
Shantina Collins, say her name.
Shantina Collins.
Melinda Ghost, say her name.
Melinda Ghost.
Destiny Lloyd, say her name.
Destiny Lloyd.
Tashina General, say her name.
Tashina General.
Nancy Hardy, say her name.
Nancy Hardy.
Jackie Lewis, say her name.
Jackie Lewis. Oh gosh.
Pamela Holyoke Paynen, say her name.
Pamela Holyoke Palin.
Right on. Carolyn Clark, say her name.
Carolyn Clark.
Mariah Highhawk, say her name.
Mariah Highhawk.
Bella Lavacan McCain, say her name.
Bella Lavacan McCain.
Thank you. Rose Downwind, say her name.
Rose Downwind.
Cody Ayre, say his name.
Cody Ayre.
Megan Noxidon, say her name.
Megan Noxidon.
Milan Rosier.
Milan Rosier.
Say her name.
Milan Rosier.
Right here, somebody over here. Larissa Lonio, say her name.
Larissa Lonio.
Anybody else? Hannah Harris, say her name.
Hannah Harris.
Henny Scott, say her name.
Henny Scott.
Royland Rideshorse, say her name.
Royland Rideshorse.
Linda Jackson, say her name.
Linda Jackson.
Esther Smith, say her name.
Esther Smith.
Jessica Santos, say her name.
Jessica Santos.
Lenore Davis Lawrence, say her name.
Lenore Davis Lawrence.
Jackie Salyer, say her name.
Jackie Salyer.
Daisy Thomas, say her name.
Daisy Thomas.
Janice Hannigan, say her name.
Janice Hannigan.
Alina Metzger, say her name.
Alina Masker.
Linda Dave, say her name.
Linda Day.
Franny Brown, say her name.
Fanny Brown.
Winter Dawn Salam, say her name.
Winter Dawn Salam.
Maria Young, say her name.
Maria Young.
Marie Young, say her name.
Marie Young.
Clara Nyali, say her name.
Clara Nyali.
Jeanne Fontaine, say her name.
Jeanne Fontaine.
Giselle Murdoch, say her name.
Giselle Murdoch.
Tina Fontaine, say her name.
Tina Fontaine.
Cindy Glado, say her name.
Cindy Glado.
Tika Lewis, say her name.
Tika Lewis.
Misty Upham, say her name.
Misty Upham.
Karen White, say her name.
Karen White.
Ileana Cortez, say her name.
Ileana Cortez.
Nicole Smith, say her name.
Nicole Smith.
Faith Hedgebeth, say her name.
Faith Hedgebeth.
Kimberly Ann Frazier, say her name.
Kimberly Ann Frazier.
Jessica Orozco, say her name.
Jessica Orozco.
Monica Rayfield. Say her name. Monica Rayfield. What is that? Ashlyn Mike, say her name.
Ashley Mike.
Tiffany Reed, say her name.
Tiffany Reed.
Jaden Barnes, say her name.
Jaden Barnes.
Savannah Graywind, say her name.
Savannah Graywind.
Vanessa Rivera, say her name.
Vanessa Rivera.
Huh? Annie Mae Aquath, say her name. Annie Mae Aquath, say her name.
Annie Mae Aqua.
Tiffany Reed, say her name.
Tiffany Reed.
The reason why we say these names, and I'm going to tell you, this is heartbreaking. We can say these names. We don't even know. There's not even no documentation. There's no database. It's like our sisters go missing in our homes, from our families, from our tables, from our ceremonies, and then they go missing to the rest of the world because nobody ever hears about them. There's no investigation. There's no reward. Oftentimes the police won't even take a report and allow the family to file a missing persons report. We're dehumanized. We're called prostitutes. We're called runaways. They just don't want to be home. They're out partying. They're with some guy. They pull up criminal history. They don't see us as mothers, daughters, sisters, aunties, grandmothers, teachers, bus drivers. They don't see us as human beings. So we go missing on several other ways. We come here today to say these names because it's important for the world to hear and know that we know who's missing in our country. We are a small community of people. I don't care if you're on Browning and you're over on the Puyallup Reservation. We know each other. And when Henny Scott went missing, we knew about it in Seattle. We worked with the family. We prayed for the family across Indian country when Henny went missing. And we mourned with the family, and we pray for the family today because she was found deceased. This is what we deal with. This is where we're at. We've been working on awareness. We've been working on trying to get the word out. We've been working on Bill 2951. We've been trying to get the VAWA passed. We've been doing a lot of things. But this is the thing that we get to do as people. Right now, everybody that you see standing up here are people and sisters and brothers that are stepping up to the plate, and each and every one of us can do that. And all you media people, thank you. Because you're obviously here to tell our truth, our story. Let it be our words. Let us be the narrators of what happens in our country with our people. Let us be the ones to tell you what is wrong. We don't want man camps. We didn't want the first man camp that came here over 500 years ago. We didn't want it then, we don't want it now. We care about our water. We love our Unshimakar, Mother Earth. And we do pray for our next 7 generations. We do understand that we're not here alone and that our responsibility goes greater than just us. Than just what we're doing right here. I think, really right now they gave us 7 minutes, and I know I'm going on Indian time and I'm getting long-winded here. And the thing about it is we're trying to shed light to a dark subject. I want to say one thing, and I think it doesn't get said enough. To my native people, to my indigenous people, we got to address the issues in our home territories. Domestic violence is not our way. It didn't come from us. It exists within our communities, but it didn't start with us. Women are sacred. We don't even have a word for prostitute. We don't have those type of words. We've always been revered as sacred and children. So we gotta address a lot of things. I'm here to just say that and our sisters too, prevention and awareness. Come on, we gotta start having more talks with each other. This social media thing, casinos, human trafficking. What does it look like to protect yourself? What are red flags? How can you identify it? Healing, ceremony, therapy, whatever it is, we got a lot of work internally. It starts with us. It's individually. I've been clean and sober a little over 4 years. A sober Indian is a dangerous one. Let me tell you. I wouldn't even be here right now. I'd probably be on the outskirts, under some bridge or something, not even knowing what's going on today. But because I'm clean and sober, Creator can use me. Ancestors can use me. And when we are clean and sober, and when we live that life, and we're on the red road, we have a lot of power within us to heal ourselves first, and then heal our own families and our own people and our own reservations, and just give it out like that. So I think, I just want to say that if there's nothing else anybody wants to say, we could sing the song together. We could sing the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women song. And I want to say hands up to any of our First Nation sisters. They started this movement. They started it. And they're still fighting it. And they're still experiencing the same injustices that they were decades ago. My heart goes out to the sisters over there and to our relatives over in the First Nations. F Trudeau and F Trump. That's what I say. I'm here standing on these steps, and I didn't even know what that building was called. I was like, that White House or whatever it is, I don't know, but I'm here. So if nothing else, we're gonna close out with the song, unless there's something on somebody's heart.
I just want to say that as we talk about our missing sisters, we have to acknowledge our missing brothers. Because we also have missing and murdered Indigenous men and boys. These things that affect our women affect our young men. Our boys, where they're taught not to say anything because it makes them less of a man. So as we fight for our women and our children, remember that it's not just our girls, it's our boys too.
She's right. She's so right. I wasn't trying to oust our brothers. I really wasn't. But you know what? As women, we carry a lot. And when she says that, I'm going to say this. If this is going out to the world, we need our brothers to step up and lead that movement. We need our brothers to stand beside us and lift us up and be the protectors that they are. We need those brothers that are healed and that are healing to step up and lead that movement for our missing and murdered Indigenous men and boys.
Haslahale, Carolyn DeFord Seedstock, Puyallup, Upshad. Good day, my name is Carolyn DeFord. I'm from Puyallup. We've come across the country today to remember our missing and murdered, to acknowledge the violence that's happening in Indian country and the injustices that are happening. I'm here to encourage everybody to use your voice. Use your voice and stand beside each other. This is the work that can only be done together. In our country, we have a word for that, and it's Yahao. This is the work which we can only do together. Thank you for mentioning our men, because our women are sacred. We are sacred, and as the traditional matriarchs and leaders in our communities and our countries, our grandmothers and our great-grandmothers made decisions for the entire community, for the greater good of all, for their sons, their daughters, their husbands, their warriors. And as the matriarchs and women and sacred women in our communities, we have to do the same. We have to use our voice to protect the whole community for the greater good of everybody. So when we're advocating and we're using our voice to stand up, make sure that we're doing the whole community. We need our men to hold our women as sacred and to teach our young men how to be warriors and protectors and providers. To have equality and balance in our communities. In our area, we're also fighting the Puget Sound PSC liquefied natural gas plant. They're trying to put 8 million gallon liquefied natural gas plant right on our traditional waterways and our traditional territories. It's a violation of our treaty right. No LNG in the 253. Our traditional treaty right says that we have the right to hunt, fish, and gather in our traditional lands and all of our usual and accustomed places. They don't realize that by desecrating our environment all across the country, that they're violating that right. Without the environment, without the habitat, we're losing that treaty right. What happens to the earth is happening to our women, and it's happening to our people. So remember, we're standing up against fossil fuel, and one step at a time we can make small decisions that make big change, and we can do that together, step by step, every bit of the way. So thank you all for listening. I appreciate it. My mother is Leona LeClaire Kinsey. She went missing in October 1999. She still hasn't been found, and she still hasn't had justice. But with the advocacy that we're doing here and by using our voices and bringing their names forward, law enforcement is not able to hide behind that empty file anymore. They know we're watching, and this is the same for all of our sisters. We're making legislation and passing laws all across the country. They hear us. They see us. Don't take your foot off the gas. Use your voice. Stand together in unity. Hold your sign. Whatever your gift is, it's your gift, and apply it to the movement. We need you. Yahoo!
Good afternoon. My name is Jerry Muma. I am Shoshone and Cree. I want to talk to you about one of the contributing factors to murdered and missing Indigenous people. That is human trafficking. We're talking about labor trafficking and sex trafficking. When we look back, Indigenous people have been trafficked since the very first point of contact. Every single fort had a brothel in it. And non-native women didn't come over for 100 years. So they were stocked with our native women. When we're looking at this epidemic that is feeding MMIW, it is a $150.2 billion a year industry globally. There's big money behind it. You have to understand that if you care about MMIW, you care about trafficking, and you can do something about it. Get yourself educated. Join us. Do whatever you need to do to bring awareness to your community, because you know what? We can only do this in unity. I'm the Executive Director for Innovation's Human Trafficking Collaborative, and we're all about unity and working together, and I thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. I would like to acknowledge the traditional land that we stand on today. My name is Maggie Sywink. I'm from
Birch Island, Ontario, Canada. I am a advocate, a family member, and an activist for the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada and in the United States. I have a brief thing I'd like to read this afternoon. So it starts with, when Christopher Columbus first set foot on the white sands of Guanahalini Island, he performed a ceremony to take possession of the land for the King and Queen of Spain, acting under the international laws of Western Christendom. Although the story of Columbus's discovery was taken on mythical proportions, in most of the Western world, few people are aware that this act of possession was based on a religious doctrine, now known in history as a doctrine of discovery. Even fewer people realize that today, 5 centuries later, the United States government still uses this archaic Judeo-Christian doctrine to deny the rights of Native Americans and Indigenous people around the world. United States law was founded on the fundamental rule of the law of nations that ignored the most basic rights of Indigenous people. From this law, Europeans claiming to discover the land saw Indigenous people as heathens, which meant they saw us as being empty of humanity. Because we were not as rights-bearing people, our lands were seen as unoccupied, empty, and open for the taking by discovering Christian European nations. Of course, as Benjamin Munn Ziegler pointed out, the lands of America were in fact occupied by Indians, not only unoccupied by Christians. Most of us have been brought up to believe that the United States Constitution was designed to keep church and state apart. Unfortunately, with the Johnson decision, Christian doctrine of discovery was not only written into U.S. law, but also became the cornerstone of U.S. Indian policy over the next century. The settling of Indigenous lands through doctrines of discovery are not with a genocidal intent. They are based on the idea the Indigenous people are not human beings and intended to erase us from the lands we occupy. Indigenous people did not need discovering. Our lands did not need settling. They were stolen with the support of colonial law and with the intent to erase us. But we are still here. Missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, trans and two-spirit people. Early efforts to raise attention to the ongoing crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, trans and two-spirit people aimed to draw national attention and action. In the early days, no one believed there was a problem. And so efforts sought to bring recognition from the state about ongoing disproportionate violence faced by Indigenous women. To try to get states to pay attention, Indigenous women in Canada partnered with international rights organizations to bring the crisis of violence against our sisters to light. As the former president of the National Women Association of Canada, Bev Jacobs argued, I want them to care about what's happening. I want them to care about the families that have been traumatized. I want them to care about why this is happening. I want them to care that this is a systemic problem and that we're all responsible. It wasn't until 2004 that mass attention was brought to the issue, when Amnesty International partnered with NWAC to produce a report called Stolen Sisters. The Stolen Sisters documented 500 cases of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in the Stolen Sisters report. The report focused on 9 cases, documented the reality that Indigenous women and girls faced higher threatened rates of violence, that Indigenous women are specifically targeted for acts of extreme violence and brutality. One example documented in the Stolen Sisters report is the killing of Helen Betty Osbourne. She was a 19-year-old Cree student from northern Manitoba. She planned to become a teacher. She was abducted by 4 white men in the town of The Pas when she was sexually assaulted and murdered. The Manitoba Justice Inquiry into the death of Helen Betty Osbourne said, Her attackers seemed to be operating on the assumption that Aboriginal women were promiscuous and open to enticement through alcohol or violence. It is evident that the men who abducted Osbourne believed that young Aboriginal women were objects with no human value beyond sexual gratification. The inquiry also found that the investigation into her death was sloppy and racially biased. The inquiry indicated that the police had long been aware of white men sexually preying on Indigenous women, but did not feel the practice warranted any particular vigilance on their part. In the case of Pamela George's murder, 2 white men were tried before a white judge and an all-white jury. The trial in the Pamela George case paid little attention to the life of Pamela George before she had became a sex worker, even though the men did not attack her while she was working in the trade industry. Nonetheless, the Judge Justice Malone, instructed the jurors to bear in mind that Pamela indeed was a prostitute when they considered whether or not she had consented to sexual activity. This is an overt abuse of the use of women's sexual history to bias the court in favor of the perpetrators. The perpetrators were portrayed as young men with bright futures. The trial solidified that violence against Indigenous women was seen as natural. It also obscured the role of the state and the criminal justice system in producing and perpetuating such violence. Globally, we watched as the names of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls continue to increase. And so the numbers are documented and they continue to rise, 600, 800, and now by 2019, thousands of names of missing and murdered Indigenous women, trans and two-spirit people were documented in Canada alone. Around the world, this issue is at an epidemic magnitude of proportions. In recent years, an awareness of missing and murdered Indigenous women has grown. What Indigenous women have been saying for over 2 centuries about the violence they face and why they have been marching for over a quarter of a century is finally being widely articulated. But we're reaching thousands of documented names of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, documented because many individuals have not been included. Others remain missing with no investigation into their whereabouts. In this context, Sarah Hunt indicates, one by one, colonial logics turn out our loved ones into statistics. Yet, as the numbers climb higher with each new death, will they ever be enough to compel the changes that we will transform this culture of violence? Colonial logistics is a logistical dehumanization of turning people into statistics. 500, 600, 800, and now thousands. Colonial logistics begin from the assumption of emptiness. The same assumption, guided by the doctrine of discovery, premised on the idea of terra nullius, empty land, and humanitas nullius, empty people. By dehumanizing Indigenous persons, especially Indigenous women, the land could be seen as empty of humanity. We continue today in so many ways to treat Indigenous women's bodies as empty of humanity. The treatment of Cindy Gladue in Regina versus Barton. Cindy Gladue was born in Athabasca on July 23, 1974. She was raised in the Calling Lake Indian Reservation and later moved to Edmonton. She was the firstborn child to her mother Donna and father Lawrence, but she was her Kokum's girl. She loved her grandma. Cindy had 3 beautiful girls who she loved more than anyone. As her mother described her, she was a lot like you and I. She loved life. She had a family, dreams, emotions. She was kind, caring, and funny. She was beautiful. She was a beautiful woman inside and out, and she was lovely in every way. In the trial transcripts, the members of the court, including the Crown prosecutor, referred to her as a prostitute, the native girl, and the native woman throughout the trial. Cindy Gladue bled to death as a result of a wound inflicted upon her by Mr. Bradley Barton. Yet rather than delivering justice, the court responded by her assault with its own measure of violence. The Regina versus Barton case was heard by Justice Rob Glacier, an 11-person jury comprised of 9 men and 2 women, none of whom identified as being Indigenous, at the Court of the Queen's Bench in Alberta, February to March 2015. In an act of complete dehumanization, a portion of her sexual organs, human remains, were brought into the court, arguing her pelvic tissue should be considered real evidence, meaning it was seen as being relevant and material to the trial proceedings. The Crown sought to have the preserved tissue shown to the jury. These actions, alongside other graphic displays of the court, dehumanized Cindy Gladue and resulted in the re-victimization of her family. Her mother sat through that whole court proceeding. The court completely disregarded the dignity and integrity of Cindy Gladue's body, the dignity of her family, and any Indigenous or even human perspective on caring for the dead. The treatment of Cindy Gladue reveals that the very real system that dispossessed Indigenous people from their land is continuing to create harms and varying forms of violence. It led many Indigenous people to ask, how can we reconcile with a state that continues to perform the violence against us? How can we reconcile with an abuser? Where do we go from here? I often ask myself that. Indigenous people are still here. We are strong and we are resilient. It is beyond time for states to acknowledge their efforts to erase us from these lands. It is beyond time for taking responsibility and action in supporting Indigenous modes of justice and resurgence of Indigenous laws in this land. This requires listening to Indigenous women who have been speaking for generations. It requires walking in solidarity and support. It necessitates a centering of the experiences of people directly affected by this violence. We must refuse a violent order and learn alternative ways of living in relation with the Indigenous people. Indigenous people provide knowledge, an alternative order that comes from connections with lands, an order of living well in relations with other people. I leave you today with the words of Dr. Sarah Hunt. Together we form a network that is not in reference to a violent legal order, but in reference to our older relationships with the land, with the supernatural world, and with other people, walking in honor, not only of the individual people we have lost to those interwoven violences, but also in honor of our ancestors who first fought against the onslaught of policies rooted in our dehumanization. The depths of our remembrance resonate across this land, invigorating a deep love for our relations and calling for a better tomorrow. We know the numbers are far greater than we can fathom. And we know that even one violent death is one too many. Miigwech.
Hello, it's a privilege to be here. My name is Tina Michelle, and Alyssa McLemore is my niece. She disappeared, it'll be 10 years ago in April, without a trace. There's been very little to no media coverage about it. So I am one of those families that the people are talking about. My family doesn't have any answers, and besides the people you see here with us, there's not very much help for us. My message today is short and simple, and it's for parents to talk to your children. Alyssa was 22 when she disappeared. She left behind a 4-year-old daughter. But talk to your children. Try to stay involved with their lives. A lot of people can't distinguish between being a friend and the parental role. There is a fine line, but it's capable of doing. So I just wanted to say that, and please get involved, even if it's just sharing flyers on Facebook, any kind of social media, any platform that you have. share the flyers for these families, because it's really hard for us. My family's been in this nightmare for 9 years now, and it's just the smallest things. Prayers work, and yeah, that's all I want to say. Just talk to your children. Children, listen to your parents. Try to keep them informed on your activities. It takes everybody. So I'm asking for everybody to please find a way to get involved, because this is a really serious situation. Once the person disappears, it's left to us family members to pick up the pieces and try to move on, and it's really hard. Another thing is, if you know someone and they have a family member who's missing or recently has been murdered or just been murdered in general, I ask that you reach out to those families. I see a lot of families that suffer alone, myself, my family being one of them. So reach out to them. Just ask them how they're doing from time to time. Go check on the mother, the grandmother, the children, because those are the ones left behind that are really clueless as to what we can do. But we can't give up. That's what we know we can't do. So thank you, and yes, and I won't forget our children either. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. I'm very nervous.
No.
Say her name one last time. Alyssa McLemore.
Alyssa McLemore.
Say her name.
Alyssa McLemore.
Thank you. We're going to close out with the Women's Honor Song, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's. Can I get some help? I'm live, and sorry guys. I'm live, and thank you. That's something about us natives. Oh, I thought I was going to talk about my phone. I was going to say really quick. That's something about us natives. I mean, we're talking about a dark subject, but I'm standing here smiling. And there's really nothing to smile about when you think about it. But that's who we are. I mean, we're jokesters, we're pranksters, we're loving, people. At the end of the day, we're gonna find something to be happy about. That's what we have to do. That's how we've made it all these years. I really do believe it. So go ahead, start us out, sisters.